This podcast is for educational purposes only, does not constitute legal advice, and does not create an attorney-client relationship. If you need legal assistance about a legal problem, contact an attorney.
Thanks for joining us on a special episode of Know Your Regulator, the podcast that inspires you to engage. I'm your host, Simone Murphy, and today we're diving deep into a pretty breaking story, the Texas Teacher Certification Cheating Ring Scheme. Joining me to dissect this case is Bertolino Law Firm's Director of Legal Services, Troy Beaulieu, Senior Associate LaJuana Acklin, and Associate Kerry Bloodsaw. Thanks for joining me today, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks, Simone. We're excited to be here.
Thank you.
So if you haven't been following up to this point, here is what we know about the cheating ring so far. So basically, prospective Texas teachers sought out or were being recruited to essentially have someone else take the teaching certification exam for them. The head organizer of this scheme recruited a corrupt proctor who administered the tests, a corrupt impersonator who would then take the test as someone else, and then a recruiter or referral agent to reach out to prospective teachers. Apparently, this was a well-known operation amongst prospective teachers, and the scheme really began to unfold when a Good Samaritan came forward, provided a tip to TEA, Texas Education Agency. Then the agency investigation revealed patterns of teachers who were traveling from, faraway cities, who had often previously failed this exam, and now suddenly they are passing with high marks, flying colors. You might think that this is kind of where things end, but it doesn't end here. In 2023, Houston's Training and Education Center, HTEC, where these tests are being administered, was shut down due to this suspicious activity, but the cheating ring then moved to a new testing location, recruited another proctor, and continued until the impersonator was caught allegedly taking two tests at one time. And I think, Troy, you said now other teachers have come forward and are confessing to being affiliated with this ring, correct?
Yes, the Harris County District Attorney's Office, when they gave their press briefing, indicated that like 20 teachers who currently hold credentials have acknowledged they paid someone else to take the exam for them, and they're cooperating with law enforcement. And apparently they're all telling relatively basically the same version of events about what happened.
Gotcha. Okay. So let's break it down. What happened and what effects might we see as a result of this? LJ, we'll start with your insights. How does this affect educational institutions in Texas? And more importantly, how does this affect our Texas teachers?
Well, that's an excellent question. So it will affect an already prevalent problem in our schools, which is teacher shortage. I want to give you a little context. So according to the Texas Tribune article that was published in September of 2024, since the pandemic rate, the attrition rate of teachers in Texas increased from 9% to 12%. So in order to rectify this problem, many school districts in Texas, they hired uncertified teachers with the caveat that they will take the test within a certain time frame and become certified. So you said something earlier, which ties into my analysis, is that a lot of these teachers, they did not pass the test originally, and all of a sudden they passed the test. So that's how this ring really came about, is that these teachers that could not pass the test, they were uncertified, they would have lost their jobs, because the law states that a contract is void if you do not have the proper certifications. It invited this in with and created this problem with this ring. So they brought in the teachers that are uncertified to solve a problem. But when you have uncertified teachers and now you have this ring of trying to get certified through fraudulent means, then that very solution then also exacerbates the problem. So that void that you try to fill with teachers because of the teacher shortage, you can't use that solution anymore. So it creates more of a problem with the teacher shortage. As far as our education institutions, of course, it kills morale when it comes down to the teachers as well as these tests. Because since now this is happening, now everyone will be looked at the credentials to see whether or not your credentials, you earned them or they came by fraudulent means, which can, again, add to the teacher shortage problem, and it also adds to the quality of education, and it just paints a picture of impropriety within the educational system, which hurts these schools in and of themselves. So that shortage, already a problem, it becomes a bigger problem, and then the picture of impropriety and what it paints, it really sheds a really bad light and puts a bad cloud over our public institutions.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I can see that. And like you're saying, there's already a shortage, and now, I mean, we're talking over 200 unqualified teachers that are going to be removed. We're looking at more of a shortage. Um, Kind of
Well,
going
and the other
into,
thing that
Mhm.
it does do, Simone, is it impacts the students too,
Yeah.
right? Those teachers are supposed to be a model of, moral virtue and how to do things right. And so a lot of those students seeing their teachers, get caught up in this, they probably start to get really confused because these are people they're supposed to look up to as role models. And now they're having these accusations that you're basically a fraud.
Carrie, can you talk to us about the criminal charges in this case? I think the district attorney's office said that it was charging 5 people with first or third degree felony counts, two each. Can you explain to us the difference between those charges and then the penalties that they carry under Texas law?
Sure. And just to sort of back up to, I think the point that you were talking about before, what the DA was talking about in terms of allowing like child predators into school was that two, I believe it was, of the people that took these tests or, paid for someone to take these tests and then were able to be in these schools. Two of those
Mhm.
people had like criminal records that probably would have prohibited them from really taking the test if they had done it in the right way. But separate and apart from that, the charges that the DA is bringing down on the 5 people involved in this ring have to do with Texas Penal Code 7102, which is engaging in organized criminal activity. So for some people that don't know, under that statute, it calls for a person commits an offense if with the intent to establish, maintain, or participate in a combination or in the profits of a combination or as a member of a criminal street gang or foreign terrorist organization, the person commits or conspires to commit one of the following. So that's the kind of organized crime language within that code. And then within that code, it drops down several different types of crime that someone could commit, right? So this 7102 is kind of the big overall statute that would, kind of apply to a lot of different organized criminal schemes and groups and things like that. But then what the DA is going to focus on is uh, Texas Penal Code 37.10, which is cited in that original kind of organized crime language. And that's going to be the tampering with a governmental record. So under that statute, there's actually several that I think could apply or may apply here. There's several different ways, right, that somebody can tamper with a governmental record. Knowingly makes a false entry in or a false alteration of a record. I think that what presents here is makes, presents, or uses a document or thing that they know is false, makes or presents or uses a governmental record with the knowledge of its falsity. So there's a couple, specifically 6, but it appears that that might be where the DA is going to be presenting most of their evidence is under that 3710, which is not really the only way I think that they could go. I mean, like you kind of heard just from the beginning of our conversation, that's tampering with a governmental record, but also under 7102, they have provisions for forgery, for fraud, for bribery, which in a couple of the articles that I read about this, they had, direct evidence of, I believe it was kind of the ringleader, the organizer, that was bribing a couple of the people on the ground, the proctors, and the other individual that was associated with the actual testing location, in order to be able to then have their partner come in and take all these tests for all these people. So definitely think they could have gone, towards that. And, obviously still can as the case, develops. But specifically, those are kind of what the DA is going to have to be looking at proving. And like we kind of mentioned earlier, they're really serious. They're in general, under 3710, these offenses are class A misdemeanors, which is the top of the bar for a misdemeanor. But there's several ways in which they can then become felonies. I think here, it has to do with a subsection that talks about defrauding and harming, having that intent, which I think clearly these individuals in this scheme would have, just in a broad sense, defrauding and harming the state of Texas. And like we talked about, the teachers that are certified and the children that are relying on them. But that looks like it bounces it up to a state jail felony. And then because of that organized crime statute, the 7102, that also has a provision in there that says any charge is going to be upgraded 1 level if it's charged under this code, which basically, I think in general we see a lot state to state, but kind of means if you're going to get together with a bunch of people and create a criminal organization and commit crimes kind of together, you're probably causing more havoc, causing more chaos, causing more harm. And so therefore, the statute allows for that uptick in the category of the felony or the misdemeanor, because I believe, a group of people are going to be causing more harm than maybe one individual person committing that same crime. So in that sense, it's looking like it would be, or it's looking like these individuals, if they are convicted, could be looking at no less than 2 years, no more than 10 years. But if people are reading, people out there reading, that they're seeing more, it's because they're charged with 2. If they stack those 2 and they got 10 on both, that's up to 20 years. I also think, depending on how the DA is really going to proceed, that I do think under that statute, they could bump it even up higher from a state jail to a felony in the third, which would increase the sentencing or the guideline sentence even more. So I know that was a lot, but basically say it all to say these teachers are definitely in a severe lot of trouble and are facing like very serious charges based on their participation in this scheme.
And the other thing that I saw the DA's office in their press release, in their news briefing, was that they were charging money laundering too. And so
Yeah.
that elevates things as well. So you've got that issue. And money laundering is just when you get money as a result of criminal activity. If hey, this money comes from criminal activity, and you take it and you use it, and you use it like you would normally use money, that's a crime. And you can be charged with a felony for that, just all in and of itself.
Yeah, really great insights for our viewers there, guys. Troy, I kind of want to stay with you and get your take on the regulatory side of things, certainly there
Sure.
have got to be rules that prohibit this kind of activity, I would imagine. What types of violations occurred here, and how do schemes like this undermine the licensing standards that are in place?
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously you want ethical, moral teachers because they're going to be teaching our children. So that's one aspect of it. The other aspect is you want competent teachers, right? You want people who are qualified, who know, how to teach, who know what the requirements are, and are skilled and trained. And if you have people that are lying and cheating and stealing, in terms of the exam, then that's totally undercutting the whole purpose of the regulatory scheme. And like we talked about earlier, it's instilling lack of confidence in our institutions, and our school children are looking up to these teachers and mentors and wondering what's going on. Definitely, the Texas Education Agency has statutory authority in Chapter 21 of the Texas Education Code to take disciplinary action. They can either pursue disciplinary action, including revocation of a license that was issued based on this fraud scheme. They could also determine that they're going to deny a pending application based on evidence that's come to light that fraud was involved. They have a specific rule in 19 Texas Administrative Code. It's section 230.21, and it concerns the educator assessment, which is the exam. And it talks all about that, including the obligation to avoid, quote, cheating, deception, or fraud in connection with taking the exam. So there's the language right there. Now, that's not to say that they don't have other tools. One tool in particular that I'm familiar with, being a former regulator, that comes up a lot, and you'd be surprised, people really don't realize this until you have a conversation with them. There is a crossover between the regulatory world and the criminal world. And in cases like this, you see where those two lines are crossing over in between each other. And in the Texas Government Code, it's chapter 2005 052 and 053. And in 2005 052, it gives state regulatory agencies, including TEA, the Texas Education Agency, the authority to deny someone a license when they have learned that someone has knowingly made false statements in connection with their application for licensure. That includes things like this fraud scheme to fraudulently have the exam taken for you, because the exam is needed to complete the requirements for your application. And so it's in connection with your application. And so what you see in that provision is they can deny the license, but then the very next section, 2005-053, says, oh, by the way, if this is done knowingly, it's a per se violation of Texas Penal Code 37.10, which is the tampering with a governmental record statute that Kerry was just mentioning. So that is a perfect way. And I've seen people in my regulatory days in a different context where there was fraud involved in an application get not only their license denied or revoked, but turn around and get charged criminally under that statute for tampering with a felony with a governmental record. So it's really important. I mean, people do not realize, they think, well, what's a little white lie? No, a little white lie can get you a felony conviction where you're going to prison.
Mhm.
And you just don't realize. You think, hey, this is a white lie, nobody's going to know. It has huge consequences, and I've seen it in a lot of different contexts. So they can use it pretty much for any aspect of the application process. If you're lying on the application, if you're producing, like a fraudulent college transcript, or if you're, in this case, having an imposter take the exam for you. The language, like we said, in the TEA rules is cheating, deception, or fraud. That's very broad language. It can cover a whole host of different things. And based on what we've heard from the Harris County District Attorney's Office, Ms. Ogg, that there was all kinds of cheating, deception, and fraud going on. So one thing that I'm particularly curious to see about now that we know there's maybe 20 or more teachers who have already confessed to their role in this is what is the Education Agency going to do about their license, which I suspect they're going to move forward with trying to revoke them. And two, are any of those people going to be facing criminal charges, like I just said, under that tampering with a governmental record statute? Because I think it's important to make sure that we address these fraud rings. And part of that is getting those ringleaders. But another part of it is making sure that there's not any demand for those unethical, illegal services, right? If everybody's above board and says, I'm not going to cheat on the exam, then those fraud rings wouldn't exist, right? So people need to have some deterrence. People need to, some people who just struggle with doing the right thing need to feel the heat, so to speak, and go, oh, geez, I better not do that because otherwise I'm going to get charged with a felony and go to prison. And I think having that kind of impress on the public psyche is a good thing. That people know that, hey, if I lie, cheat, and steal, the government may come after me because we don't want damage to our educational institutions and things that harm our kids.
Yeah, and if I can just add to that, I think that that's definitely true, and I think that's why the DA is moving forward as they are. Because like Troy said, if teachers think they can get, or people that want to be teachers think that they can get away with this, they will continue to do it, and these rings will keep popping up. I mean, I was very surprised that this had been going on since 2020.
Yeah.
And it was really only this, the investigation started mid 2023. They said there was, I know we know about 20 teachers have already come forward, but they said 210 teachers were certified through this ring, which means that the DA office knows those 210 teacher names. So I also think that's something to think about, for some of these viewers to understand that I think the DA is going to be going very, very hard at this so that she doesn't have to deal with this again. So another ring doesn't come up in another couple of years. But that's also to say some of these teachers that are involved may very much want to consider one, like Troy said, what TEA is going to do to them, but also what criminal charges could come and the possibility that turning yourself in may look better than, you know, getting that call or that knock on the door in a couple of weeks because clearly they have the names.
Right.
So
yeah.
And just to
Go.
add to that, the news reports, as far as the State Board of Educator certification, they have confirmed they are working with law enforcement. So more than likely, there will be some criminal implications for the teachers that willingly participated in the ring. And just like Kerry stated, it may be better just to turn yourself in to quell whatever criminal liability may come their way.
And Simone, when I did this during the mortgage fraud heyday about 15 years ago, after the financial crisis with the real estate industry, working as a regulator with state and federal law enforcement, what I found is people don't realize these things take time. So, it's not like, oh, well, I didn't get a phone call this week, everything's fine. I mean, I've had years go by because some of these laws have such long statute of limitations. 2, 3, 4 years come by, and law enforcement says, okay, we're done now. We've built our case. We're ready to go. And then they go knocking on someone's door and they're caught off guard. They're flabbergasted. They say, well, that was so long ago. So, well, we had, a bit of a backlog. And like Kerry said, there's over 200 of these. So you don't want to be sitting there looking over your shoulder for this long extended period of time. But it's people don't realize that it really can take a long time, and they have that amount of time.
Now, I know you guys had mentioned that the teachers may be charged, and the organizers and the people that were actually directly involved in, in this scheme. Do you guys see a big discrepancy in the charges? Like, will the organizers who had a really big hand in this get more severe charges than the teachers who just, paid to obtain their certificate fraudulently?
So I can at least start off the answer to that. So as of right now, the five people involved, which include, the organizer, the AP that was taking the test, the other AP that was recruiting and, referring, and then the test proctor and the test staffer are all listed in the indictment. So the indictment that we've been talking about today goes over all five of those defendants, and they're each charged the same with 2 counts of that 7102 organizing criminal activity. So at this point, they are being looked at the same in terms of an indictment. Now, in the criminal world, generally, the guy at the top might get the worst, and the people at the bottom might start to break, and everyone's talking, and confessing and trying to make, deals and negotiate. And, 90% of cases plea out. So who knows if this will go to trial or not. But I would hazard to guess at this point, they're all being looked at as the same. But as, people start to admit things and accept plea deals, some of these counts could change. They could go away. They could be modified in some fashion. They can always be reduced. The DA has a lot of discretion in that. And especially with something like this, where, we don't necessarily know the backdrop of why they started this, what they were doing. Obviously, it was motivated by money. So all of those kind of mitigating factors could come into play to see, or to have an impact on what sentence they'll actually get, or if they'll decide, to risk it and go to trial. But with the teachers specifically, at this point, to my knowledge, none of them have been charged. Tia obviously is working and knows, who they are most likely, and will probably be, like Troy said, sending out notices, and they should be prepared to have their license revoked. I think what I would speak to for those teachers at this point that haven't come forward or that are debating about coming forward, understand that Tia also has discretion in not revoking, because at this point they wouldn't qualify for a certificate. So Tia can't, just let that go. They do have the ability to allow them to do it the right way and go through the process the right way. And generally, forthcomingness, honesty, and compliance with TIA, just like with law enforcement, but specifically in the administrative world, is going to go very far. So I would say at this point, they should be thinking about the criminal side, but they also should be thinking about the TIA side, because for some of these people, it might seem very similar.
Wow.
The
Yeah.
consequences. Yeah.
Great information.
Yeah, I completely agree with Kerry. And the other thing I think that's really important, especially if you believe that you're caught up in this issue, is make sure that you get legal counsel. Make sure you go out and you really probably need to be looking for two things. One, you need to be looking for a licensed defense attorney, someone who can represent you in front of the Texas Education Agency. And then you may also need to seriously consider, because like we've been talking about, there is some criminal liability exposure here, getting a criminal defense attorney potentially. But I definitely think that, being open and forthright and honest is the best way to go, especially with a case like this, where the government has been working with the Texas Attorney General's office and investigating this for well over a year. And they've been working with the Texas Education Agency, and they've got auditors and investigators, and they're going to have every little piece of thing, the money trail, the bank information. I mean, heaven forbid if you paid one of these people the $2,500, they're going to have that payment with your bank and all the proof. So it's going to be very difficult to be able to avoid, those facts and that documentation. So like Kerry said, coming forth and taking ownership and trying to forge a positive path forward with the regulator or with law enforcement is always the best approach when they have a very well documented investigation with, solid evidence.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with Kerry and with Troy. And something else, I think any educator that may listen to this podcast, there is a do not hire list. So you more than likely would be placed on that list because of the gravity of the certification fraud. The whole purpose of regulatory agencies and the Texas Education Agency, of course, is included, is to protect the public, specifically protect our children that are being educated in our schools, and they want to make sure that you will not have access to the educational system within Texas. Also, since this is national news now, there have been reports on CNN, MSNBC. In order to protect the public, I would not have any doubt if you do not come forward and try to forge some sort of negotiation with both the Texas Education Agency and the DA's office, they will, as to quote my grandmother, make a believer out of you. And you will be all over the national news. So not only would it hurt your ability to ever get a job in the educational system again, it may hurt your ability to be employed, period. So to try to quell that, is probably best that you make some sort of efforts to come forward.
Yeah. And like I was saying, if you're getting ready to do that, contact a lawyer, get legal counsel, get legal advice, somebody who can walk you through contacting the Texas Education Agency, contacting the Harris County DA's office, and be your advocate. Even though you're going in there to do the right thing and acknowledge what's happened, you need an advocate, you need legal representation. You don't want to go in and try and do that on your own. Just like you wouldn't want to give yourself your own root canal, right? You go to a dentist. You need to do the same thing when you're facing serious legal consequences.
Yeah, and my only other thing I'd point out to that is like Troy mentioned earlier, um, you know, the sooner the better in that respect, because at this point, I used to do criminal defense work and I never had a client that didn't keep very detailed notes of their criminal activity. And it appears at this point, because they have all the parties involved, right, that they are going to know who these people are. And they know, they said this ring, brought in almost $1 million. So they counted that money somewhere. So if you are kind of out there thinking, oh, well, now, like Troy said, it's been several months, I'm sure I'm in the clear. You're more likely than not, you're not. And so if you know that you are involved in this, best to contact a lawyer, but then to start coming forward, because I think the stragglers at the end of this that have to be found by, Harris County or contacted by TIA are going to have much harder a time than the other ones that just kind of admit defeat and come forward.
What kind of changes might we see in the future?
Well, certainly anytime you have stuff that hits the news, it impacts agencies, right? Regulatory agencies and the legislature too, right? Because none of these changes would be possible without new legislation. But what I would say is definitely, the pendulum's going to swing probably to some extent, and they're going to look and want to assess, is there other things we need to do? Do we need to have some kind of auditing process for, the Texas Education Agency has the authority to do a lot of audits. I don't know that they have specific audit authority directly for the examinations. But certainly they saw a disturbing pattern and that prompted them to open an investigation. You also have the partnership with Pearson VUE. That's the test provider. They're one of the big ones in the country. When I was a regulator, I actually sat on a couple of those panels that would screen prospective test providers, who were jockeying for the contract to do these. And they really do take integrity and security and compliance seriously, and they want to minimize and eliminate cheating and fraud. And so they have their own team. So you'll probably see closer coordination efforts, kind of, I think they'll debrief, and say, what are the lessons learned? What are the takeaways? And what can we do, at that contract level between the Texas Education Agency and the exam provider like Pearson VUE? And then what can the Texas Education Agency do on its own by amending its rules? The State Board of Educator certification, amending their rules. And then kind of the next level would be, do we need any legislative changes? We're heading into the legislative session starting here in January. And so do we need to consider drafting some kind of bill that would amend the education code to give additional authority, tools, resources, those kinds of things? But those are kind of the three levels: at the contract level with the provider, at the rulemaking level, and at the legislative level.
Okay. Yeah. Any ways that you guys, just with legal insights, do y'all see any way that this cheating ring could have been avoided? Other than maybe total honesty and integrity in every prospective teacher.
I think,
I guess,
go
all
ahead.
right, somebody else go.
Troy, you want to go first?
I was just going to say, in my experience, anytime there's a government program, there's always those few bad apples who are looking at a way to exploit the system through fraud or cheating or deception. And so no matter how many tweaks you make, it's constantly trying to play catch up with the next invention of somebody who doesn't want to be honest.
Yeah.
So I don't think there's a magic bullet to completely eliminate that. I mean, to do that, I think you have to change human nature, and that's not going to happen. I do think there's a lot of things that people can do to minimize and reduce and mitigate the risk of this fraud, though. And that is, I think, what TEA, the exam provider, and the legislature will probably be looking at over the next 6 to 12 months.
Yeah, and I think on a like very small scale, I know when I was reading about the specifics of the case, it looked like the AP that was taking the tests was just following in after the person would come and turn in their ID and then they would leave and then he would replace them. So having taken a couple of certified tests, I find that a little surprising that you could just walk in there. I know when we took the bar, your ID sat next to you. So, I mean, I think maybe on a smaller scale, they might be looking at some of those things. You can't fingerprint everybody every time somebody comes in and leaves the room, but I think you could probably do a little bit better job with the ID process. Um, and then other than that, on like a very grandiose scale, kind of just like what LJ talked about earlier, I think there's a big lack of faith that's been brewing in public education in the US for a while, and then also in Texas, certainly post-COVID. I think out of this generation of people that are parenting their kids and trying to figure out, should I homeschool? If there's a lot of remote schooling opportunities, and then there's private school. And I think based on that and kind of the struggle that the public school system has seen, people obviously thought, oh, teachers are really desperately needed. I could probably get away with this. Or law enforcement or TIA would look away because, I'm coming into a system that's already broken, so I'll break it a little bit more and no one will notice type of thing. And so I think on a bigger scale, that's just part of what the legislature needs to look at and maybe changing how they're doing what they're doing with public schools, but also, trying to reinvigorate the faith that people should have in public schools and the safety of public schools and things like that. And I think that the DA is probably very aware that those, that's on her shoulders, so to speak, to prevent this from happening again and ensure to the public that your kids are safe when they go to these public schools every day.
Just for context, my husband is actually a teacher, and he told me how the process works. You have to put your entire handprint in order to get in to take a test. But the tests, they're in different rooms. So that leaves room for someone to come in and be swapped out with someone else to take the test. Also, too, there's a disconnect between the Texas Education Agency and the facilities that are set up to take these tests in the first place. And just like Troy said, with those collaborative efforts, I think TIA should be more in a collaborative, with a collaboration with the individuals that own these facilities and bring their own people in to make sure that the test is being proctored properly. I also agree with the audits. And just to piggyback on what Troy said, I believe the audits should be blind audits. You should know when they're coming. TIA should be able to show up to the facility, because in a lot of these facilities, you can take a certification exam 7 days a week. So they come in on a Sunday at 2 p.m. They come in, they show, we here from the Texas Education Agency, we just want to audit what's going on. We just want to see the facility. I think that can boil down, or it could have been used to avoid what has happened.
Great point. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thank you all for joining me this afternoon, and thanks to our viewers for tuning in. We hope you enjoyed this episode. The story is still developing, so we encourage you to keep an eye out for related news and updates. Thanks again, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Know Your Regulator, the podcast that inspires you to engage.